Don't listen to the voice of the dead, especially if it asks you to get up. Tonight I'm bringing you 3 listener-submitted stories that all end at the same dangerous crossroads. A familiar voice, a quiet command, and the moment when grief makes us vulnerable. Each of these people believed they were hearing someone they loved. Each of them almost obeyed. And each story shows why that instinct, to answer, to comfort, to follow, can be exactly what puts you at risk. I'll read the submissions exactly as they were sent, translated into plain English. These are reports, not proofs. The people who wrote to me are saying what happened to them. I'll describe what they felt and what they saw, and I'll underline one simple rule that ties all of it together. If a voice claims to be a dead loved one and it asks you to act, don't do it. If these stories hit home or give you chills, hit subscribe now so you don't miss the next episode of Listener Tales. Story 1, an Airbnb too close to the past, from a listener in Guadalajara. The trip was supposed to be nothing more than a weekend away. My friend, let's call him Sergio, booked a last-minute Airbnb to celebrate a cheap escape from work. It was close to the center, the listing said. Bruised photos of the house in warm light, a narrow vertical doorway that led into shadowed rooms. The price was too good. They made a joke about getting a bargain and driving down that Friday night. The house itself was the kind of place that feels older than its furniture. Tall ceilings, narrow staircases, a faint smell of cedar, and something else. Nothing in the house smelled like a modern home. The hosts were friendly enough, but they gave off a stiffness that Sergio thought of later, like someone trying to remember what to say. There were pictures on the walls, but none of the faces looked current. One wall had religious icons hung upside down. In the closet, stacked behind moth-eaten coats, were dolls, rag dolls with glassy painted eyes, like toys that had been put away and looked embarrassed to be found. They joked about the dolls at first. In the dim kitchen, their group told stories over beer. Childhood pranks, a concert last summer, and someone mentioned that the garden in back looked like it hadn't been watered in weeks. It was small things, the kind you ignore when you're together and safe, until the knocks started. The knocks came from inside the closet that held the dolls. At first it was 3 soft, spaced knocks, like somebody tapping a rhythm on the wood. Sergio thought someone in their group was messing with them. He stood up, went to the closet, and felt the hush of emptiness behind the coats. The dolls were exactly where they had been, though one of them was facing outward now, sitting on the edge of the shelf. No one had touched it. They shrugged it off and laughed more loudly than necessary. That night, lying on the top bunk because the house was too narrow for many beds, Sergio woke to the sound of a chain sliding. Someone had undone the small chain that locks the terrace door. Cold air fanned across his face. He told himself it was wind. He told himself many things. Across the hall his friends slept. He could hear the hum of the city like a low pulse. A few hours later he woke again to a soft, breath-like sound right by his ear. Nothing loud, just the hair on the back of his neck standing straight up. It wasn't words. It felt like someone exhaling, as if someone leaned close and blew the night onto him. The group packed before dawn. They left in the silver light of an early Saturday, coffee cold in travel cups, and blamed the uneasy feeling on the house and the coffee. On the drive home they told the story with nervous laughter, the dolls in the closet and the unlocked door becoming part of the weekend lore. Weeks later Sergio tried to look for the Airbnb again. The listing was gone, removed from the platform entirely, like a shop that had shuttered overnight. He told his friends. They shrugged and said maybe the owners moved. But one of them asked a different question. Did anyone actually see anyone? Did they ever see a person move the doll or open the terrace door? Sergio's voice on the message trembled when he told me this part. He said, "There are other little things I don't mention to my parents. I don't want them to worry. But sometimes when I'm home, when I close my closet and turn out the lights, I check the corner where I keep my old sweater. There are nights when I feel like something is watching the doorway." He believed the house had given them something. Small, insistent reminders, a knocked rhythm, a doll moved, enough to unsettle, enough to make someone feel that a place had been opened that shouldn't be. What matters in this one is the way small domestic details became an entry point. An object in a closet, the feel of breath, a chain sliding on a door. These are things that invite curiosity, that make you look. If a voice had come later claiming to be a neighbor or a family member, mimicking a tone you knew, would that single knock have been enough to convince Sergio to open that door? He didn't say yes. He didn't say he ever heard words. But his story shows how physical cues prepare you for something more dangerous. A voice asking you to act. If you think that's eerie, wait until you hear the next submission. This one ends with a voice that knew exactly how to sound like someone they had lost. Story 2. The voice that knew her name. From a listener in San Diego. Alex grew up in a small house on the edge of the city. After his mother died, nights were a particular kind of empty. He started sleeping on the living room couch more often because the house felt too big and too quiet in the bed. The television stayed on low, a companion for the hush. Friends would come over and they'd sit, but most nights he was alone with the blue light and his own thoughts. The first time he heard it, he was half asleep, that fragile place where dreams smear into the dark. The voice called him by name. Soft, familiar, the kind of tone a person uses when they're leaning into someone and telling them a secret. It said, "Alex, close the window." At first he thought he was dreaming. He blinked and reached for the remote. The voice spoke again, a whisper now. "Close the window, baby. The breeze will make you cold." Alex tells me he sat straight up. His hand paused over the remote, the TV playing a sitcom laugh track in the background. He told himself it was his brain, that his body was making sense of loss. His mother used to fuss over drafts. She used to call him pet names and remind him to wear a jacket. The voice coming from the hallway sounded exactly like her. Over the next week, the voice returned at the same margin between sleep and wake. It started with small things. Close the window, move the chair, turn the oven off. Each instruction was small, helpful, the sort of domestic care you miss when someone is gone. Alex told me, it felt like someone checking on me. I wanted to believe it was Mom. Then one night the voice escalated. It was late. The room was quiet enough that the hiss from the heater sounded far away. The voice spoke with a firmness Alex hadn't heard from it before. "Get up. Open the door." Alex says he froze. It was a command, not a suggestion. He could hear the exact cadence his mother used when she meant business, when she wanted him to stop what he was doing and do something immediately. The voice pulled at the old reflex, the reflex to obey, to trust the tone that had guided him as a child. He stood up because he was halfway convinced he should. His hand reached for the doorknob. At that moment his phone rang. It was his grandmother. She was crying softly and said, "I dreamt your mother called me. She said she was calling Alex. It was weird, but I thought you should know." Hearing his grandmother on the other end broke the trance. Alex says he stepped back from the door, palms shaking, and told his grandmother to wait. Then, because he couldn't explain what had just happened, he told her about the voice. His grandmother's voice quavered in a way that made him feel younger, like in the old days when the adults in the room had to decide how to protect a child. She said something he kept repeating to himself afterward. Dreams can cross the house, but if someone outside the dream tells you to leave or to open up, that's not the same. After that night, the voice didn't come back. Alex stopped sleeping on the couch. He moved his mattress back into his room and replaced the old blanket his mother kept. He didn't say he felt entirely safe, only that the second the voice shifted from helpful to commanding, the nature of it changed from consolation to threat. Alex's report shows a crucial pattern. Familiarity breeds trust. A voice that knows your name and knows how to sound like someone you love can slip past rational defenses. The timing matters too. Those moments between sleep and wake are when the mind is least guarded. The phone call from his grandmother was an ordinary interruption that saved him from answering a door. In the middle of grief, ordinary things, calls, texts, people dropping by, can act as lifelines. If you ever find yourself on the brink of obeying a voice that claims to be a dead loved one, ask yourself, who else knows this detail? Who can confirm? And if you can't get that confirmation, err on the side of staying put. That same principle is what troubled the family in my third story. Their brother was gone, but the house kept acting like he hadn't left. Multiple members of the family heard things. Multiple witnesses added weight to the fear. But even with many people seeing and hearing, the family didn't know whether to hold on or to step away. Story 3. When everyone hears it, Mauro and the household that wouldn't let go, from a family in Chihuahua. When Mauro died in a car crash, the house seemed to pause. I'm told the family, large, always crowded, voices in rooms, rearranged themselves around the absence. They said their names for him in coffee and set a plate occasionally at the table. Mourning in a big family can be both comfort and a pressure. Everyone shares in the memory, and each new thing that happens becomes fodder for 100 different interpretations. It started small. Footsteps in the ceiling space, footsteps after midnight, a heavy tread that sounded like someone walking the attic. It wasn't in any room you could stand in. It came from the floor above, or maybe inside the walls. Sometimes it was a solitary footfall, slow and deliberate. Sometimes it sounded like several people walking at once. One sibling told me they would be washing dishes and look up, convinced someone was at the door, and then realize all the siblings who should have been home were home already. There were knocks in a wardrobe, sharp, rhythmic taps on wood when no one was near the closet, so precise it felt like a message. One night, a sister opened the wardrobe and swore she saw space move inside it, like the air itself folding and settling, as if someone had passed through and brushed past her sweaters. The family didn't report a violent confrontation. This was mostly small, physical anomalies that kept the memory present in ways that were sometimes tender and sometimes terrifying. Objects moved. A record player in the back room started repeating the same Elvis song over and over, the needle catching and then sliding back to the groove, the music halting only when someone stood and took the record off. The stove would make bangs like a heavy pot being dropped, and the oven would rattle as if someone slammed it shut. The family members described it as their house being restless. One of the neighbors told one of the adult brothers that they had seen a tall, pale man standing on the sidewalk outside the family home late at night. The neighbor was unsure at first. Maybe it was the moonlight, they said, but the description stuck. The brother went out and looked. There was no one there. The tricky thing here was that it wasn't just one person having strange experiences. It was multiple people sharing a pattern. That complicates how a grieving family responds. If you're the only one hearing something, you might question your own mind. When several people report similar episodes, there's pressure to ascribe meaning to them. The siblings began to debate. Was this evidence that Mauro somehow hadn't left? Or was it a lingering energy, a residual replay of past stress? Some turned to prayer, others to silence, and a few to packing suitcases and sleeping in friends' houses for a while. One sister told me the hardest moment was when the knocks began to ask for things. They weren't words you could understand at first, just rhythm. But eventually one night the rhythm shifted into cadence, then into something that resembled speech. It said a single soft word that everyone in the house recognized as a nickname they used for Mauro. The house said, Mao. Hearing that nickname felt like a direct call. Some of the family wanted to answer. They wanted to believe it was him. Not a memory, not imagination. What made the situation more dangerous was the mixture of grief and shared attention. A presence that is acknowledged by many can feel validated. That validation can encourage escalation. The family started to divide. Some wanted to stay, thinking movement or uprooting would offend the memory. Others were terrified of staying in a home that kept asking for a man they buried. The fear was not just of the sounds themselves, but of what might happen if someone trusted those sounds, if someone obeyed. They never reported a violent event. No one was physically taken from the house. What the family reported most was the corrosion of certainty. Small things, repeated, eroded their sense of what's safe. Sleep became thin. People who used to laugh together now measured their words at the table. They moved some members into other rooms, opened windows to let air move through, sometimes stayed with relatives for nights at a time. The house did not stop entirely. It kept up a background rhythm that the family could not interpret. Was it Mauro? Was it something else? They couldn't say. This family's story reveals another layer. Even when something appears to be from someone you miss, the presence can still be harmful. The voice that mimicked a nickname was a classic trap. The nickname is a key that opens emotional locks. The family wrestled with not wanting to be cruel to the memory while also not wanting to be led by it. Aftermath, reflection, and what to do. Across these three stories, Sergio's weekend house, Alex's voice in the half-sleep, and Mauro's family, the through line is the same. Grief creates openings. Objects and sounds are the first thin invitations. Familiar tones and private nicknames are how whatever is behind those sounds gains trust. The danger comes when the voice moves from comfort to command. I want to be very clear about one point. None of these accounts proves anything about what happens after death. The people who sent these stories report what they experienced. There are a dozen possible explanations: psychological effects of grief, hypnagogia, pranksters, electromagnetic anomalies, or something unknown. I'm not telling you any of these are definitive. What I'm telling you is practical and simple. In every submission, the moment of greatest danger is when a voice asks you to act. So, here are a few narrative-based, common-sense precautions, framed not as instructions to fight the supernatural, but as ways to protect yourself in the moment. First, treat any voice claiming to be someone who has died with skepticism. A voice that wants you to open a door, to go outside, to lock a window, or to fetch something should be treated like any unknown caller asking you to step into the dark. Ask questions you can verify. Ask the voice something only the real person would know in a way that requires real-time confirmation from living evidence. If you can't verify it, don't comply. Second, create ordinary interruptions. Alex's life was saved by a phone call from someone who could verify that a dream had been had, not a live imperative. If something in your house compels you to act, call a friend or a family member and ask them to come over or to talk while you stay put. The physical presence of another living person often breaks the spell. Third, prioritize safety over sentiment. Grief is powerful. It makes us willing to believe things because the alternative, loss and emptiness, is unbearable. Letting longing guide action can have real consequences. If you hear a voice asking you to leave, to let someone in, to go into the street, or to hand over a key, refuse. Stay in a well-lit room with a lockable door and call someone. These are simple steps that don't require faith or ritual, only prudence. Fourth, document what is happening. If you feel comfortable, keep a log. Times, sounds, who was present. Multiple reports from different people can help you decide next steps, whether that means getting a trusted friend to stay, moving someone out temporarily, or, if needed, involving someone experienced in mental health or community leadership. I emphasize mental health only because some of what I read could also have medical explanations: stress, sleep disruption, grief-related hallucinations, so it's reasonable to consult a doctor in parallel with other measures. But don't let the possibility of a psychological cause lead you to ignore immediate safety. Finally, do not try to discipline a presence alone, and do not perform dangerous actions because you think a deceased loved one is telling you to. Don't go outside at night to meet someone who calls your name. Don't open doors for a voice you can't verify. Those are the moments these stories warn us about. Closing reflection. These 3 submissions came from very different places: Guadalajara, San Diego, Chihuahua, and yet they all taught the same lesson. The voice of the dead can come clothed in kindness. It can start with small favors and build toward a request that will separate you from safety. In every case, the narrators were ordinary people trying to live after loss. They reported their experiences with fear and with tenderness. They asked for anonymity or preserved the dignity of the ones they'd lost. I honor that. When someone you miss sounds close enough to touch in the dark, it will be tempting to answer. Don't. Not out of cynicism or cruelty, but out of caution. If a voice tells you to open the door, to step outside, or to do something alone, stop, call someone, and verify. That split second of refusal is often the moment that keeps you safe. If you have a story like the ones you heard tonight, something that started with a familiar voice and ended in a near miss, or something that left you wondering whether a loved one was really present, send it to us. We read everything we get, and if it fits the episode, we may include it someday. There's a link in the description with submission details, and if you've been listening and want more listener-submitted true scare tales, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Remember the rule. Don't listen to the voice of the dead, especially if it tells you to act. Trust living people. Trust ordinary verifications. And when in doubt, choose safety. Good night.